This is the High-Stakes Lowdown, a RotoViz podcast brought to you by the Fantasy Football Players Championship. I'm Eric Balkman from the High-Stakes Fantasy Football Hour and the FFPC. You can follow me on Twitter at Eric Balkman and the FFPC on Twitter at FFPC. Before we get into the show, I want to remind everyone that you can get a listeners-only 10% discount to RotoViz by using the code RVRadio2022. That's RVRADIO2022. Your subscription gives you unlimited access to all of the RotoViz content and tools, and it supports the podcast channel. Now, without further ado, here's the latest edition of the RotoViz High-Stakes Lowdown. Welcome aboard, everybody. Hello, and welcome to the July edition of the RotoViz High-Stakes Lowdown. I am Eric Balkman. You know me from the High-Stakes Fantasy Football Hour, the Fantasy Football Players Championship, and the Better Sports Network's High-Stakes Fantasy Football Show as well. RV Radio 2024 is the code you want to use to get a listeners-only RotoViz discount. The 2024 Fantasy Pros Championship is also live, so check that out at myffpc.com. If you like drafting for $1 million, if that's your type of thing that you like to do, we have a $1 million contest with the Fantasy Pros Championship as well as the FFPC main event. Slow and live drafts are both ongoing for both of those competitions right now. If best ball is your game, myffpc.com is where to go for the Superflex Best Ball Tournament and the Best Ball Tournament. $100,000 and $300,000 grand prizes respectively, and just $35 and $125 to get in as well. Empire Leagues, Empire Dynasty Leagues are also here at the FFPC. We're filling up Empire Dynasty startups as well as Classic Dynasty startups nearly every single day at myffpc.com. That is where you want to go, myffpc.com, your home of fantasy football. Remember to like this video, subscribe to the channel, comment on the video, share with your friends, share with your enemies, and get notified each and every time we go live here on the FFPC YouTube channel. This month, pleased to be welcoming aboard a first-time FFPC Pros versus Joes competitor. He will be drafting in our first Pros versus Joes draft Sunday, July 21st from the 5 spot. He's here not only to talk about that, but the rest of his drafts he's also compiled so far this summer. He has won a league in the FFPC main event. He has won a league in the Fantasy Pros Championship. He has won a league in the FFPC High-Stakes Dynasty Leagues as well. He's done it all, and he's going to do it all for you tonight. Please welcome onto the RotoViz High-Stakes Lowdown, Mr. Greg Mistretta. Greg, welcome in. Thank you for popping aboard tonight.
Good to be with you, Eric. Thanks for having me.
It's always good to have a Joe on, because we always root for the Joes. Obviously, here at the FFPC, we always want the Joes to win. How did you find out you were selected as a Joe this year, my friend?
Via email. Was excited to get it. I'm deep in my drafts. I've been drafting a bunch in June and July, so I was happy to get the invite and excited to be on the T-shirt.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I forget about the T-shirt too. You get your name on the T-shirt, which is always good as well. This is an FFPC show, so why don't we start off the show tonight with the tight end question? I think that's the only fair way to do it. A guy I drafted as my top tight end in one of my in the only KFFSC main event draft so far was Evan Engram. Now in the Fantasy Pros Championship, obviously a tight end premium format, you're looking at his ADP at the 402. He's tight end 7, a massive year last year, Greg. Is he going to pay off that high of an ADP here in the 4th round this year?
I think he would struggle not to. I really don't see what's changed for him. He did it on an absurd amount of targets last year, an absurd amount of receptions in a tight end premium league, as you said. And I think he's got a clear pathway. He's got a clear relationship with the quarterback, the coach. They've already been talking about deeper routes. I mean, he was so much less on a yards per catch basis. He was in the 8.2 range where everybody else was in the 10s. If he just projected that up a tick, I don't see how he can. And for the other guys, you're paying for their value. You're paying first and second round prices for Trey McBride's, Mark Andrews. So let me be the guy that falls around and a half later and takes Evan Ingram in a very safe position, still keeping my first three picks.
Do you think, Greg, I was talking about this with Howard Bender on Fantasy Alarm earlier today. Do you think that the elite tight ends are like deeper this year? In other words, like I always say that it always seems like there's a big three at tight end every single year. Now, who those big three are, that varies year to year. But it always seems like there's a big three. And this year, I think with Kelsey getting older, the rise of Laporta, the rise of Kincaid, you mentioned Evan Engram, obviously Mark Andrews, Trey McBride is in that conversation as well. It almost feels like there might be less of a race to get one of those top tier tight ends because the top 5 or top 6, they're kind of flat this year. And as you pointed out, Evan Engram would be a good guy to snatch at the end of that tier.
Well, that's just it. It's the end of that tier. I think it has expanded beyond 3. I think we're living in a 6 tight end kind of world where you're going to have, I think Ferguson's in that conversation as well. And I think he's a massive value, Ferguson with Dallas. But I think you're talking about 6, 7 tight ends deep, but you still don't want to be left without one of them in a tight end premium league. I think that's quite a disadvantage.
Right.
You know, I'm willing to draft my quarterback super late, other positions, but a tight end premium league, I'm looking to get my hands on one of those 6 if I can.
Kyle Pitts, we might failed to mention him too. He's going at that 3-4 turn right by Evan Engram. That's another guy too. Again, say what you will about Kyle Pitts, but the situation is once again different this year. And I know he's polarizing. He's polarizing every single year. There's going to be Kyle Pitts truthers out there. There's going to be people that just let him fall as well in regards to how they attack him in Fantasy Pros and FFPC drafts this year.
He's exactly that, polarizing. But to me, it's with the other guys going right around that same position, I'd rather tilt in that direction. That said, I do love Cousins.
Right, exactly. Yes. Jonnu Smith, over the course of the last month or so, it seems like more and more people have been talking him up. They've been talking about him, not as a tight end 1 or anything like that, but as a sleeper tight end late in the draft. And I noticed he has climbed up a couple of rounds. Are you buying into his value now that he's on Miami? You think about what he did last year. Speaking of Kyle Pitts, how frustrating was it to own Kyle Pitts last year when Jonnu Smith was getting all those touchdowns and catches? Now he goes to Miami, 16th round. I mean, it's not anything crazy, but are you buying into the value that you can get with Jonnu Smith late in drafts this year?
100%. He's a big late round target for me. He's fantastic yards after the catch. He's always at the top of the league in that statistical category, no matter where he plays. He's never had a quality quarterback throwing him the ball. Not that he does now either in Miami, but he has a much more open track race. He has a better coaching staff, a better way to fit into that offense. So yeah, I'm expecting pretty big things out of Jonnu. A low end 1 for me.
He's another guy too. Like if you wait on tight end, let's say you don't get, I'm just looking at the Fantasy Mojo right now. Fantasy Mojo, Darren Armani at Fantasy Mojo on X. Anytime I cite ADP on the show, it's always through his website. But if you look at like that top, I mean, even George Kittle, I think you could lump into there since he had 1,000 yards last year. Then after that, I think you have question marks. David Njoku, he did most of his damage with Flacco last year rather than Deshaun Watson. Brock Bowers is a rookie. Dallas Goedert is another year older, and there obviously is a couple of or 3 really talented guys in that offense too, in Barkley, Smith, and A.J. Brown. Then you get into Freiermuth, Hawkinson. We don't know when he's going to be coming back too. So, but let's say, Greg, you get 1 or 2 of those guys. Let's say you get Njoku and you get Hawkinson or whatever. Jonnu Smith, to me, represents the perfect guy that you want to get as your 3rd tight end, which I think you need mostly, unless you get an elite of an elite tight end. I think you really need 3 tight ends in a Fantasy Pros FFPC main event draft. And Jonnu Smith is a guy that fits the bill for me perfectly there.
I concur 100%. Yep. In that same range, the thing is, we were going back to the question about getting one of those top premium tight ends, and you can debate whether it's 6, 7 guys, whoever it is that you like. But after that, if you miss, you really have to put a few of those guys in that tier together. You're going to have to grab a Gesicki. You're going to have to grab a John Smith. You're going to have to grab Tyler Conklin. You're going to have to put together 3 strong B pieces if you don't have an A, so I think Jonnu Smith, to your point, that's where you fill that in.
What about and let's shift to the running back position here, Greg. The thing with Jonathan Taylor, I know he's had injuries, and I don't think he's still in his prime, so I'm not really concerned about anything debilitating there. What does concern me is that when you historically have a mobile quarterback on your team, like Anthony Richardson is, and showed that he was last year, oftentimes it is much easier for Richardson, rather than dump it off to Taylor, to just tuck it and run. He's a big guy. He says he's not changing his style of play, so he's still going to be running this year. Jonathan Taylor is at that 1-2 turn, and I think, I always love investing in running backs there, but they got to be able to catch passes. How concerned are you about Taylor's pass-catching numbers from a season-long perspective, taking a bit of a dip if Richardson is not dumping off to him as much as previous quarterbacks in Indianapolis, where that did not have the mobility of Richardson?
Yeah, I don't know that it scares me that much. I really don't, because sometimes that mobility is creating new plays out of something else, and he's dropping it off to him in other ways. The numbers might dial back a tick from his potential, but the running lanes, I love that offensive line. I love the running lanes that are going to open from Richardson. Give me those bang plays because they're playing off Richardson, and Jonathan Taylor's running for 68. So I'll lose a few receptions. The Jonathan Taylor is about as solid as it gets for me this year.
And I think that's the thing too, is we have to big picture this, right? So if he doesn't catch enough passes, the running lanes are going to be open for him. He's still going to be able to nab those extra, fantasy points that he would lose there via rushing yards, via touchdowns, everything like that too. Right now, Jonathan Taylor, I think I said 1-2 turn. I want to just clarify that and make sure I'm right on. 201 right now. Which one do you like? Because they're going back to back. Which one do you like there? Are you more likely to take Jonathan Taylor there or Saquon Barkley there?
Jonathan Taylor all day long. Barkley's not a consideration for me in round 1, nor is Jahmyr Gibbs. He's right there. He's right at the end of it. So I shouldn't say it's not like that's a stretch, but to me, I'm taking Jonathan Taylor in that position every day of the week.
Yeah, and Taylor too is, it wasn't too long ago, 2 years ago, I think he was the de facto 101, right? So, and this is another guy too. And you know what? We don't have him on the rundown. We're talking running back, so I'll bring up Austin Eckler right now. Jonathan Taylor was a player that was going as the first overall player in the draft a couple years ago. Austin Eckler wasn't that. He was going like 104, 105. But Greg, this dude has tumbled so far this year. He's on a new team. He's in Washington now. Running back 30, going back to back as the running back 30 with his real life teammate Brian Robinson, who's running back 31 at that 8-9 turn. Is that a spot that you want to be invested with Eckler, or is that still not far enough?
Not far enough for me. I had him faded last year. He just doesn't look the part to me when I watch him on the field anymore. And I thought that when he was still having a productive year the year before. I just couldn't see it. I didn't understand how the numbers were compiling from what I was seeing. And I frankly think Brian Robinson's a good all-around back. Brian Robinson's tough, gritty, goal line. I think he's going to be used as the 1A, 1B, and Eckler doesn't excite me a whole lot. He doesn't.
Yeah. I get it because we're all familiar with that play last year against Green Bay. I think it was last year against Green Bay, where it looked like he was basically running in quicksand. Like he looked like he was a 40-year-old running back in a 27-year-old running back's body, or 28, or however old he was at the time. And that sticks in my mind. And I understand that, the offense in Washington this year with Kingsbury and with Jaden Daniels could be a little bit different. But if Brian Robinson is taking the reins there and running with it, so to speak, then that will hurt Eckler's prospects. So I get why you'd want to let him slip a little bit further there too.
And there's just other people in that tier, in that position where I would be there. It just wouldn't be who I'd be looking at.
Well, Eckler had his best years for the Chargers. He is not there anymore, but the Chargers have a lot of running backs right now, Greg. They have the rookie Kamani Vidal, who I know a lot of people are excited about. J.K. Dobbins, where it seems like he's everybody's favorite running back, and then he gets a preseason injury, and then he's out the game. Gus Edwards is another player that comes over from a really bruising rush style, rushing meat and potatoes offense in Baltimore. Now he comes to Los Angeles to ostensibly do the same thing, we think, with Jim Harbaugh. Do you have a favorite Chargers running back to draft this year? And before you answer that, just for the crowd who's watching and listening right now, I can tell you, as far as Los Angeles Chargers running backs go, right now in the Fantasy Pros Championship, you have Gus Edwards as running back 41 at that 10-11 turn. You have Kamani Vidal at the 11-12 turn as running back 48, and then J.K. Dobbins right after him as running back 50. Out of those three, I mean, they're all going super late. Do you have a favorite, Greg?
I for sure do. It's Gus Edwards. I think Harbaugh has a relationship with him, and I think he's just going to pound him, and I think they're going to run it down people's throats, just as you would expect they would. And to me, he's the lead horse in the stable. Hesitant until I see rookies perform, but the whole offense is winning. Like all you should want to do is own the San Diego's running game, because you just said it. You're investing 10th, 11th, and 12th round draft picks. Nothing could go wrong with that. Nothing, that is gold. And that you can, I don't always handcuff. I'm not someone who's a always cuff guy, but when you can cuff with the 11th and 12th round or 12th and 13th round draft picks, it's a non-brainer.
What about so let's talk about this from a Fantasy Pros or a FFPC main event perspective. 20 rounds, season long, managed teams. Would you advise somebody doing that, going in 10, 11, 12 and taking off? Because right now you might be able to pull that off. You might have to do 9, 10, 11 rather than 10, 11, 12, but you might be able to pull it off where you get all three Chargers running backs. Is that something that you would advise?
No, I would never do that. I'm not interested in Dobbins in this equation. There's nothing about him that excites me. It's either going to be a Gus Edwards show or it's going to be because Vidal, came in and took over. Coming off the injury, I'm just fading Dobbins in my mind, and that leaves me two guys to worry about drafting. But the beauty is you don't have to cuff. I mean, again, you're investing a 12th round pick in Kamani Vidal. If it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. If you can't hold him for the long term in a managed league, you put him back in the tank. Let people spend their bid dollars on him. Depends how your team's built, of course. But
what about if you let me frame it this way. So you're drafting in the main event, you're drafting in the Fantasy Pros Championship. Let's say you only have one running back or two running backs on your team by 10, 11, 12. So you would go back to back with the Chargers, not just grabbing either Vidal or Edwards. You would go with both of them there if you could.
Not necessarily, but I would be willing to take Vidal right after if he falls into where I want him. I do have other wants and needs. And if I felt like I had to, the way you frame the question, if I only had two, then it would be good business for me to take the backup in the third round. Then I would know I own the San Diego's running back offense, presuming J.K. Dobbins is not part of the equation in my mind. So yes, it would be very smart to do that if I only had two backs at that time.
Okay.
If I had four backs on my roster and I'm taking Gus Edwards or Kamani Vidal as my fifth, that's okay. I don't need the other.
Did you is it fair to say when you're done drafting this year in September that you'll have 0 J.K. Dobbins and maybe a sprinkling of Vidal and a sprinkling of Edwards, but not necessarily this much more than Edwards over Vidal? They'll be about the same?
No, it's going to be stronger on Gus Edwards.
Like 60-40 or 65? It
depends the format. Dynasty, best ball, a managed team, I'd be less interested in owning Vidal, more interested in owning Edwards.
Okay.
In a best ball format or dynasty, Vidal might be the way. But yeah.
It's crazy. Like all the ways we could split hairs on this too, with all the different formats and it's the same team. It's the same backfield. Going to be very compelling to watch that Chargers running back situation and the Chargers in general this year too. I mean, you say what you will about them, and maybe they won't be as good as last year when they had Keenan Allen and Everett, and Mike Williams and Eckler and all these guys, but it will be entertaining, right? Ladd McConkey, Joshua Palmer, Quentin Johnston, year 2 of that. We'll see how that plays out as well. So they may not be a good offense, but they will be one worth watching for fantasy. Shifting, we're just talking about receivers for the Chargers. Let's talk about receivers for the Bills. Stephon Diggs is no longer there. He is now a Houston Texan. The Bills soaked in a early second-round pick into Keon Coleman. They went out and got Curtis Samuel. Khalil Shakir is there again this year. So there are other players on the perimeter to complement Dalton Kincaid and James Cook in the inside. Who is your favorite Bills running back to draft, wide receiver, beg your pardon, to draft this year, Greg?
Very easily for me, it's Khalil Shakir. And I'll tell you why. It's really value where you're getting him. People are paying up for Coleman. It's like almost 3 rounds earlier to get Keon Coleman. They did make an investment in him. He's got a great spirit to him, as you could see from his interviews, but I'd like to see him play first. And Khalil Shakir made big plays. When I watched what he did on the field, it was just a matter of more opportunities. He needed more opportunities. Now, the offense is much different being run with Brady and running through Cook, and they don't use wideouts in the same way that other teams do to me, but Khalil Shakir has huge room for potential and big play. And again, format is important. Best Ball Dynasty Leagues, more so than maybe a Fantasy Pros Championship. But I still love him either way. But Khalil Shakir would be, to me, the value at wide receiver on that team.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because we just talked about the Chargers running backs. Edwards was going first out of those 3, and you liked him best. For the Bills receivers, Shakir on average is going last of those 3. Now they are bunched together fairly closely. Keon Coleman is going in the early 9th round. Curtis Samuel you can get in the late 10th, and Khalil Shakir is the mid 11th. Like it's wide receiver 45, wide receiver 50, and wide receiver 52. But it's crazy. I mean, to think about too. And I know Kincaid is probably going to have a boatload of targets, and he's probably going to be their number 1 receiver there this year. But as far as the perimeter pass catchers, the wide receivers on this team, Josh Allen's top option is not going until the 9th round. And in your opinion, Greg, he's not going until the 11th round, which is fantastic value for fantasy.
Yeah.
I think that, we talk about these offenses you got to get right. And some of the offenses over the years that have been so integral in fantasy success have been the ones that have undergone the most changes. And while it's not like a ton of changes happen on the Bills offense, when you take out a guy like Stephon Diggs, and Gabe Davis, by the way, is no longer on that team too. He's in Jacksonville. So if you can get offenses like this, right, the Bills, the Chargers, these teams that undergo all these changes, it makes life so much easier to get to the championship round and then maybe cash that $1 million grand prize as well. In looking at some of your teams, Greg, I did notice, first of all, you're dynasty champion with the FFPC, so I know you play a lot of dynasty as well. But I did see one Jalen McMillan on a bunch of your teams this year. Jalen McMillan, the rookie, who is now from what was in Washington playing for the Huskies, and now he's playing for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Now, Jalen McMillan is going at like the 18th, 19th round. It's very, very late in Fantasy Pros Championship drafts. Why do we need to keep him in mind in redraft, or should we only concern ourselves with him in dynasty?
No, I'm all day long on this guy, all day long in every kind of format. I try to own him every place I possibly can. To me, it's a ton of opportunity. Who's in front of him? Is it Trey Turner?
Exactly.
There is nobody on that team. It is a pile of nonsense behind Chris Godwin and Mike Evans. Chris Godwin is always a fade to me. He's a fantastic skill set player, but highly unreliable from year to year, month to month, week to week. Mike Evans is fantastic. I adore Mike Evans. I'd still draft him. I still think he's a great value now. But Mayfield's a gunslinger, and this team is screaming for Jalen McMillan. He's going to me, he profiles Amon-Ra St. Brown, Keenan Allen. He's a 6'1", 200-pound target monster. He glides across the field. He's more fast than quick. He's everything about him. That's why I'm drafting. That's why you draft in July and June, because by the time you get to mid-August, he's going to be a 10th round pick. Right. And I don't know, all day long for me, Jalen.
Trey Palmer was the guy I was trying to think of. Titosaurus pointed that out to us in the YouTube chat. Trey Palmer, by the way, who's not being drafted for the Buccaneers right now. Mike Evans, wide receiver 16. Chris Godwin, wide receiver 33. Jalen McMillan, wide receiver 86 in the 19th round. You think about a lot of times in drafting these 20-team leagues in the FFPC, you're just scrambling to try to find anybody you like in the 17th round, the 18th round, 19th, 20th, whatever. When you can get a guy like McMillan, who, by the way, nobody talks about this. I shouldn't say nobody. A lot of people don't talk about this. Jalen Polk was a second-round pick by the New England Patriots this year, who was college teammates with Jalen McMillan. If you look at the numbers, Polk was only really, really good and successful when McMillan was hurt. When McMillan went down, that's when Polk stepped up. And now I don't want to make it seem like, okay, well, that team doesn't know how to draft this position, so anybody they draft, I throw out. But New England's been sucky drafting wide receivers over the years. And they take a guy like Jalen Polk, and then Jalen McMillan slips. I'd be much more interested in Jalen McMillan than I would Jalen Polk. And in your FFPC rookie drafts, you probably saw it, Greg. Javon Baker, a guy that the Patriots took 2 rounds after Jalen Polk, he was creeping up on Jalen Polk in dynasty rookie drafts too.
Yeah. For good reason. All those things you said. McMillan was a target monster in college. The year before last, when he wasn't sharing the ball as much, I think he had 79 receptions. McMillan his skill set's gonna, I think, just fall right into the NFL. I think he has all the things.
He's a guy that I wish I would have had more shares of. And honestly, I wish I wouldn't have let him slip so far in my rookie drafts where I didn't get him in enough spots. That could be one of the picks I regret. Jalen McMillan, you heard it here. Well, probably not first, but you heard it here July 9th, 2024 from Greg Mistretta, that this guy is going to be a baller this year and for his career too.
Yep.
Keeping it in Tampa Bay, Baker Mayfield is the quarterback there. Baker Mayfield last year was the beneficiary of Dave Canales' wizardry in getting that offense to shine. Now, Canales loved to run the football a lot more than the new, and I got to look up the new OC's name again, but I remember that when he got hired, the transition was supposed to be, hey, this guy likes to throw the ball a lot more than Canales did, which is good for guys like McMillan, guys like, Cade Otton and Evans and Godwin, all these guys. And so if it's good for all those guys, it's got to be good for Mayfield, right? Baker Mayfield should be in for a good year. And yet Baker Mayfield, FFPC players taking Mayfield right now as quarterback 21, not until the 17th round. I feel like if you get an elite quarterback, you could probably wait and draft Mayfield as your quarterback. You'd probably feel pretty good about it. Or am I being too bullish on Baker Mayfield this year, Greg?
Not at all. I feel strongly. Baker, for all of his inadequacies early in his career, he played well when he was with the Rams. He played well at the last stint in the last 2 places he went. I mean, he's been playing a good brand of football now for an extended period of time. And if nothing else, he's a gunslinger. So if he's losing games because he's throwing interceptions, he's going to matriculate the ball down the field to his playmakers, and he's going to pile up statistics. So no, I'm very comfortable with where he's going. I think he could be a number 1 on a team if you're pairing him with somebody decent in that range, and he's also a viable backup. I don't draft many backups when I have a good quarterback. I used to draft none. I would go in with 1 and 1 only in a season-long format. But now with the rash of injuries at the position, I really like to have 2.
I think that it's interesting you bring that up, because I used to do the same thing where I didn't, especially if I'm drafting early, right? And obviously I don't draft in the FFPC because I'm an employee of the FFPC, but drafting in the Kentucky Fantasy Football State Championship or any of these other formats, I feel when I draft early, I don't want to waste an 18th round pick or 17th round pick on a backup quarterback. So I was always trying to find, the Kyron Williams of the world, players like that. James Robinson was a big one a few years ago. And then I don't know what happened. Somebody got hurt. A couple of guys, I know what happened. I went way too heavy on Matthew Stafford the year he got hurt. And then I was scrambling on the waiver wire and I said, Balky, never again. We are drafting a backup quarterback in these formats. I don't care what point of the season is. If it's early, if it's middle part of drafting season, we're getting a backup. And I feel like it's helped me. I know it stinks to, it's not fun to use one of those valuable 20 spots on a backup quarterback. But I think you have to at this point when there's so much at stake. And, 1 or 2 weeks could keep you out of the playoffs. And if you have to scramble at quarterback, I really think that's a good investment.
Yeah, agreed.
Brock Purdy. We have not talked about him yet tonight. Brock Purdy, the Mr. Irrelevant of the draft, final pick of the NFL draft when he was a rookie. And now we're looking at him as not only a starting quarterback in the NFL, not only as a relevant quarterback for fantasy, but as a potential starting quarterback for fantasy football. He's now quarterback 12, which means he is being drafted as a starting fantasy football quarterback in the Fantasy Pros Championship. He's going at the 10-12 right now. So basically the exact halfway point of the draft. The other guys that are going in that neighborhood for quarterback include, if I can find it here. No, he's kind of a little bit by himself. Jaden Daniels is about almost a full round ahead of him. And then Jared Goff is about a round and a half behind him as quarterback 13. So he's kind of by himself there a little bit. And I know the weapons are there. They drafted Pearsall as well this year. So it's wheels up for the San Francisco 49ers offense. But you're still talking about a 7th round pick here running things. You willing to risk a 10th round quarterback investment into Brock Purdy, Greg?
Yeah, the 49ers are willing to give him the ball. So I think my fantasy pro ballers can. He proved it all year. His numbers are what his numbers were. He's in a dynamic offense. He's protected by layers of coaching and other skill position players. He's actually, to me, I would say quite consistent. I have no fears about him reproducing what he produced last year. So he's going in a fantastic position. I would draft him all day long at 10 as my first quarterback. I'm reading the space, as you said. He's kind of in that 10 by himself. There's a couple of guys around before him, a couple of guys around after. Mm-hmm. So you can usually gauge in reading the board with who you're playing with and how aggressive they were with the earlier quarterbacks to know if you can kind of hang back a little bit and get him in the 11th or you can kind of feel it a little bit based on what everybody else was doing with quarterbacks.
Go finish your thought. I have another quarterback question for you, though.
Yeah, I'm one, and to each their own. But I'm never drafting a quarterback, or I shouldn't say never. In today's current format, I'm not drafting any quarterback in the first 4 or 5 rounds.
Okay.
So to me, the 6 is where my world may open with a CJ Stroud, and the 7, 8, 9 might be where I am with Jordan Love, and those are actually prime targets for me. That's where I love to be. I love to be in CJ Stroud, Jordan Love world. In the middle of there is my number 1. But if I was to miss them, my alternative is Brock Purdy, Jared Goff. That next layer right underneath is where I'd be shopping.
What about let's say Purdy, because you said you'd be good with Purdy as your number 1 quarterback, right?
Sure, he was last year.
Okay, so they're perfect. So if you do that, that means that you have, again, by ADP, you have the 12th quarterback off the board. Do you normally like to back up your starting quarterback right away when you wait that long?
When I wait that long,
right.
Yes,
okay.
Because I want to be in that tier, as we said, with Mayfield. If you gave me Jared Goff, Kirk Cousins, 12-13, if you gave me Jared Goff, Mayfield, 12-14, please.
Okay,
that's stealing. You have insurance, you have 2 guys, you're fine being your number 1, and you're investing 12th and 14th round picks to get them. I could just as likely go, like I said, Jordan Love in round 8 and Mayfield in 13 as well.
What about and I think I know you're going to answer this, but I'll ask you anyway. Let's say you have let's just say in a vacuum, which quarterback do you prefer this year, Greg? Jared Goff or Caleb Williams? Because I think Goff is the veteran, he's got the weapons, but Caleb Williams has the weapons. He's young, but he's got the pedigree as well. Where do you fall in on which player you'd rather have?
100% the veteran. Jared Goff is playing some of the best football of his career. Everything they're doing is to make him successful, both on the offensive line, running game support. And rookies, you don't know. I'm not drafting Caleb Williams in a redraft format where he's going. There's not for me.
We touched on this at the top of the show, pros versus Joes. For those of you not familiar with the format, it is going to be 84 players in this tournament, 42 industry pros, 42 FFPC Joes. The Joes were chosen randomly in a drawing of anybody who had signed up for the FFPC main event this year by the early bird deadline, May 31st. Greg was one of those players. He was in the draft lottery, essentially, and his name was chosen. So he will be one of those 42 Joes competing against the 42 pros. Now, 7 leagues. Each winner of these 7 leagues will win a free entry into the 2025 FFPC main event when they try to gun for a $1 million grand prize. I looked at your league, which we'll be covering live on this FFPC YouTube channel, Sunday night, 7 p.m. Eastern, with the Seltzer League this year. Peter Overzet, Sigmund Bloom, Matt Schauf, Theo Greminger, Todd Burrows, Stacey Perez, murderer's row of pros. However, some of those pros don't regularly play in the FFPC. And sometimes with these pros, Greg, they don't understand the format. They don't understand the nuances like players like you do. A guy who not only is familiar with the FFPC main event, but you've done a ton of best ball drafts as well.
I find that very hard to believe, Eric.
No, seriously. I'm dead 100% serious. Now, here's the thing. You know that you're going up against people who, talk about, produce content, write about fantasy football for a living, but they may not be as accustomed to this FFPC format as you. It's kind of weird because in your normal FFPC main event, you're going against really 11 talented Joes that know what's going on. Here, you're going against 5 talented Joes and then the pros who should know a lot, but maybe won't execute their draft in the same way. How do you prep for an event like this?
Well, I don't think they need any handicap. I'm sure they'll do just fine. I'm not going to prepare any differently than I would. I feel like you know your players, you know who you want. I'm always playing the board. I don't look at the names on the top. It's different than when you're in a home league or when you've drafted with people year after year and you might understand their tendencies. But for me, I'm playing the board, whatever comes in front of me and how that draft adapts. I'm someone that doesn't go in with, starting to try to get receivers or starting to try to get running backs. It is all value based for me. I have people I know I'm targeting and it's my objective to fit as many of these players that I want into my 20 rounds. So,
and that's your approach for any draft, right? And then I think that's the best way to do it is be fungible enough to draft. And you're drafting from the 5th spot here. So be fungible enough to know like, okay, well, if the 3 spot and the 4 spot and the 6 spot are loading up on these positions, I can let the value come to me at these other positions. I don't need to worry about like, oh God, I'm totally unbalanced right now. I don't know how I'm going to pull this off, because it always seems like you have a balanced team and you can always pick up the value where it comes.
When you asked me about early in the very start of our conversation, we were talking about Evan Ingram and tight ends in general. When you ask, will he hold value at that 4-2 spot? It's a matter of who's left there. It's like when you get there and I see, T. Higgins, Stephon Diggs, McLaurin, Hollywood Brown, that doesn't interest me over Evan Ingram. I would much rather own Evan Ingram in that style format, at that spot. So it's not so much just that I believe in Evan Ingram. I do. But aside from that, it's where he's falling in position to the players that are going to be drafted around him. And that goes throughout the whole draft, right? The draft changes as you follow along, and whoever you're playing against is the formats, and you're recalculating. You're taking a guy you were going to take an 11, you're moving him up to 10. You're readjusting, you're position filling here and you're adapting there. So, there's times I forego players I love that I want so badly, but the way that my makeup was going, I have to kind of divert paths and just be confident that there's other players I'm going to love 2 rounds later, and I'm going to feed my craving.
We got a question from Dominic Guzzetti in the YouTube chat right now. He wants to know if you consider Evan Ingram in the same bucket as George Kittle, because that way you can draft Kittle later and get the same production. Now, to point that out to the viewers out there, Evan Ingram, 402, which we talked about at the top of the show. George Kittle not going until the 509. So you're talking about a round and a half of value, where if you wait and draft George Kittle, it could pay off. But that's only if you're putting him in a similar vein to Evan Ingram. Is he in that same bucket, that same ballpark, that same tier for you, Greg?
To me, he's not. I understand why he is to most. There's no player in the NFL I love more than George Kittle. I mean, I love everything about that guy as a real football player.
Yeah.
But his, injuries, how he could be completely faded out if they need him to be blocking or doing something else. He had massive crush plays last year. If he didn't have the splash plays he did, he had 60 receptions. I mean, you're talking about a guy that had 114 receptions and a guy that had 63 or 69, I think, if I'm not mistaken. Am I mistaken? To me, it's, I don't know. There's lots of other ways that San Francisco can win. And as much as I love him as a real player, there's too many good games in a row and then missing games. I think they're really relying on Evan Ingram. I think they're going to be stretching him out. And I feel much more comfortable booking Evan Ingram
with Ingram. Yeah, no. And it's one of those things where, like, I didn't really realize how good of a season he had last year. Until I started doing research for 2024, right? And I'm like, oh my God, Evan Engram, look at this. This is insane. And the YouTube guys are pointing this out. Rubio, I think, pointed it out, said Dom pointed it out. Like, when you have all these spike weeks and these big plays that you were alluding to, Greg, I mean, that's got best ball written all over it. But
Correct.
when you have a guy like Evan Engram, who was so much utilized in that offense, right? Consistently, that's a guy you roll out and you start every week and you don't worry about it. And he was flex worthy last year too, because a lot of people didn't necessarily draft him as their starting tight end or their top tight end. He was a guy that you could flex out and then roll out 100 catch tight end as your flex, which is just
that's what I'm saying.
Awesome.
So you're going to roll out one of those receivers as your flex, or am I going to roll out Evan Ingram as my flex? Yeah.
I think we should wrap things up here. Yeah, and this is always a fun question, Greg. A player now, again, you can cop. I can already see how you're going to cop out of this question, but let's just say, in a vacuum, where you're not letting the draft come to you, where you're going to get your guys, who's a player that you want to get on as many teams as possible this year, and then conversely, a player that you're going to try to stay away from. Let's say at least at his current ADP, you don't want to have any part of him. The good guy, the bad guy, the target, and the fade.
All right. You're 100% right. I don't want to answer the first part of your question. I mean, we've already spoken about a lot of guys that I'm targeting. So,
right.
We've spoken a good deal about the guys I like. I'll leave a few of them as surprises for my pros versus Joes. There's guys that I just avoid. I fade. Ironically, Ayuk and Higgins, both having nothing to do with their contract conversation. Well, not nothing to do, but I think they're both good players. I don't think they're unicorns. I don't think they're dynamos. And I think their teams know that, which is why they won't pay them like that. They're that level below that. So they're just guys that where they get drafted, I will never draft them. It doesn't mean I don't like them as real football players or that they don't have value. It just means I won't ever draft them where they're being drafted. Those two guys in particular. Same with Diggs at this point. I've always loved him. I have him on a dynasty team. He could ball out this year. I'm kind of fading him where he's going. I fade DJ Moore all day long, every day, twice on Sunday. Again, not that I don't love him as a real football player. I do. But Keenan Allen is a target monster. There's a rookie quarterback in town. There's Roma Dunze in the background. I'm just not paying what you're paying for him when you could get whoever's right next to him. You tell me who's.
Yeah, I'll tell you right now. So DJ Moore, which by the way, I think is a guy who's falling a little bit in Fantasy Pros Championship drafts. I'd have to check the stats on him over the last few days, but he's wide receiver 23 right now at the 407. Right in front of him, Metcalf, Devonta Smith. Right after him, Stephon Diggs, Zay Flowers, and George Pickens. That's where Moore is going right now at the 407.
Yeah.
I think that, I was going to follow up with Moore, but I won't do that because I want to follow up with the Texans receivers. You said you don't like Diggs. Does that mean you like Collins and or Dell this year as draft targets?
Love them both. And again, format is important in here. Tank Dell all day long. But Tank Dell is an explosion waiting to happen. If not for injury, Tank Dell is going to burst into this league in a big way. He's just getting started. That guy is all day long. Tank Dell, I'm huge on. And Nico Collins is steady, big, highly underrated. Houston knows what they have in him. They just paid him. He's going to produce all year long. I'm very confident in that relationship. So.
And it makes perfect sense. You know, it's all about congruent. It's getting the pieces to fit and getting, you know, I talked about these offenses that undergo changes in the offseason. Texans are another one where they're getting Tank Dell back, and they got Stephon Diggs on this team, year 2 of CJ Stroud as well. Greg, what a pleasant conversation this has been. I learned a lot about how you like the draft. I'm going to learn a lot more about how you like the draft when we cover your draft. Not this Sunday, but the following Sunday, the one that kicks off all the Pros versus Joe's live drafts. Farrell Elliott and I will have the call right here on this FFPC YouTube channel. I'll send you the link to join the show if you want to make a pick live on air. That would be tremendous as well, because this was a lot of fun talking to the fantasy pro baller tonight, the 4-time FFPC league champ and first time ever Pros versus Joe's drafter. Congratulations on that this year. Congratulations on all your success, and good luck bringing home maybe a pair of $1 million grand prizes this year. You never know, Greg. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Eric. Congrats to you. Talk to you guys soon.
Thank you. Thank you. Greg Mistretta, ladies and gentlemen, hopping aboard the RotoViz High-Stakes Lowdown for the July 2024 edition. That is going to wrap up the show tonight. I want to thank Greg. I want to thank the FFPC for putting this show together each and every week. And, of course, RotoViz as well, if you are listening on their podcast channel. The show is live again Tuesday, August 6th. That's our next time we go live in the offseason. We're just going to go live on the first Tuesday of every month. I was on vacation last week, which is why we're doing it this week. Tuesday, August 6th, this is a big one, 10 p.m. Eastern. The $500,000 2019 FFPC main event overall champion Mike Poetic will rejoin the show. We'll talk with him. That will be in the thick of drafting season then, where there's just a zillion drafts going on. So we'll talk with him that night. That is Tuesday, August 6th, the next time we go live. Now, this channel will go live again this coming Thursday with the Better Sports Network. I'll be hosting the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show. My guest co-host, the founder of the Fantasy Football Conclave. What's it called? The big fantasy football thing in Canton every year. Why can I not think about this? Bob Lung from the Fantasy Football Expo. I don't know why I was calling it the Conclave. The Fantasy Football Expo. He is the guy who started this all. From Big Guy Fantasy Sports, and Bob Lung will co-host with me Thursday night, 7 p.m. until 9 p.m. Eastern time on the Better Sports Network, as well as this FFPC YouTube channel. Then Friday night, we'll have live Fantasy Pros draft coverage. Hopefully you enjoyed the Fantasy Pros draft coverage that Bradley Stalder and Aiden LaCorey brought to you tonight. Earlier this evening, we'll have more live draft coverage at 10 p.m. Friday with myself and Farrell Elliott calling all the shots then. That is the live show schedule for this week. Now, keep in mind that we have a Fantasy Pros Championship midnight draft that is going off in 68 minutes. We have 5 openings that will fill. So get in right now and take advantage of the FFPC weekday giveaway promotion with the Fantasy Pros Championship. If you sign up and draft the team from yesterday, Monday, on through this Thursday night, you'll be eligible to win a free Fantasy Pros Championship team this year. We're going to give away 3 of them this week, and now those will be announced on Friday. So if you sign up, not only can you draft for $1 million tonight, but you might be able to get a free team out of this as well. That's at myffpc.com. The Best Ball Tournament and the Superflex Best Ball Tournament going on there as well. FFPC main event, slow and live drafts going on right now. Now is the time to be drafting. And of course, if you like playing fantasy football 365 days a year, like Greg Mistretta, you can do so with the FFPC Dynasty startups and the Empire Dynasty startups that are popping off nearly daily right now as well. Go to myffpc.com to check it out. Remember to like this video, subscribe to the channel, comment on the video, share it with your friends and enemies, and get notified each and every time we go live, which will be once again this coming Thursday at 7 p.m. with Bob Lung from the Fantasy Football Expo and myself, Eric Balkman, on the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show. Thanks for watching the High Stakes Lowdown, presented by RotoViz and the FFPC. Be good, everybody. Thanks for watching. Good night. Thank you for listening to the High Stakes Lowdown, a RotoViz podcast brought to you by the Fantasy Football Players Championship. And thanks to Grapes for our theme music. Please review the podcast on iTunes under the RotoViz radio feed. It helps us find new listeners. Contact us via email, rotovizradio@gmail.com. We'd love to hear what you think, and follow us on Twitter at RotoVizRadio. And remember, you can always support the show by subscribing to RotoViz at a 10% discount through the NFL podcast homepage, rotoviz.com/podcast.